Good morning, everybody. Today is August 30th, 2020. And just as an announcement, or maybe a reminder if you remembered, if you are free after lunch today, the elders and deacons and myself, we will be at the RSDA parking lot from 1 to 2:30 p.m. today, August 30th, 2020. And we'll be there handing out our updated church directory. We will be masked up. We will be spread out. And if you would like, we could just do a curbside service. We could drop it off in your car if that's what you would like. And we just want to welcome you to swing by and say hi. And we would love to see you, love to pray with you if you have any requests. And so, yeah, we're just making ourselves available there from 1 to 2:30 p.m. today, and hopefully we'll see you there. And so just to begin today's message, I don't know about you all, but I personally am not one for the game of chess. You know, I know the rules to this game, but I would say I don't really know how to play, at least with any real strategy. I think I just don't have the patience for chess. I mean, chess is about foresight, and you have to be able to see, 10 steps ahead. And with chess, you want to be laying traps for your opponent and waiting and being patient. And I think chess really epitomizes this fact that when you cannot overpower your opponent, you must outmaneuver them. And when you cannot overpower your opponent, you must outmaneuver them. And last week, we looked at Mordecai's story. Right? Mordecai, he's going to be this rook. And he mourned the passing of this edict that Haman passed, this edict which would eradicate all the Jews in the Persian Empire, right? And eventually, Esther, we saw that she became convinced that she had to do something. Right? She must speak out. She had to at least try. At least she had to try. But what could she do? Right? The law had already been passed, and it could not be repealed, even by the king. And so Esther knew that she had to appeal to a higher power, and she had to act very carefully. She had to be very careful, and she had to act strategically. Right? When you cannot overpower your opponent, you have to outmaneuver them. And so that's what she's going to do. Esther, she plays a game of chess. And so this is where we pick up in Esther chapter 5. Esther intercedes. So Esther chapter 5, verse 1. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, in front of the king's quarters, while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room, opposite the entrance to the palace. And when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight. And he held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. And so this is all happening on the third day. This is a callback to last week when we talked about how she asked Mordecai and all her fellow Jews to fast for her, right? Fast for me 3 days. And you might remember that at first, Esther, she was very reluctant to do anything, and she was actually quite afraid. And she actually didn't really want to do anything at all. But it seems like the last 3 days of fasting and praying, that through that time, she has found her courage. She has found her courage, and so she gets cleaned up. Right? From her fast, she cleans herself up. I imagine she puts on some makeup, and she puts on her royal robes. And she's dressed and she's ready. She commands authority and respect. And in the original language, it literally says that Esther, she puts on royalty and enters the house of royalty where Xerxes was sitting on his throne of royalty. So the royalty is mentioned 3 times. And so the author is intending us to see what she's doing as this grand and epic and noble act. Right? And so this is really the dramatic turning point of the entire book of Esther. Right? This is the climax. This is what the entire book has been building up to. You might notice in the background to my slide here, this comes from the movie One Night with the King, which is the Esther story. And this is the iconic scene where she flings open the doors, right? And she enters the throne room, and she's ready to sacrifice her life to save her people. And this is that iconic scene here. She's flinging open the doors, and she's walking in. And this scene, we are actually to be reminded of the actions of Queen Vashti, actually. Esther's predecessor. You might remember her story. And we are to see this great contrast between what Vashti did and what Esther is now doing. But we're supposed to recognize that this act of Esther's is actually a great risk to her. Because remember, Vashti, she was stripped of her royal robes and crown, right? She was cast out for not going to the king when she was summoned. And now, ironically, Esther is now also at risk, but for the opposite thing. She is now at risk for going to the king when she is unsummoned. Right, so both Vashti and Esther, what they are doing can be interpreted as these illegal actions or even signs of disrespect. This scene right here can be seen as a sign of disrespect. Now, we as the audience are to acknowledge there is great danger in her move. What she has done, her move has been quite risky. And though we know the outcome, because we've heard this story, countless times, Esther did not know what was going to happen to her. For her, this was really putting her life on the line. This is a sacrifice. If you might remember last week, she said, "If I perish, I perish." And so she really was risking her life. And this kind of goes to show, in the game of chess, sometimes you have to sacrifice a queen to get to the king. And so Esther, she has to throw herself at the mercy of the king. And thanks be to God, we see that this king, he is moved by her act, and it says that she won favor in his sight. She won favor in his sight. Now, whenever you see this phrase in the Bible, you're supposed to understand that it's not just natural. There's something supernatural happening. This is being done with the help of God. Okay, she won favor in his sight. God is helping her. It's not her beauty. It's not her charm. It's not even her character that is attractive. The king is seeing something more, something mysterious. Right? And he cannot tell, but he feels compelled to listen to her. Right? And so he extends the royal scepter, and he grants her the pardon, right? Because if he didn't do that, she would have been killed, because this was clearly a very illegal act to approach the king unsummoned. Okay. And verse 3, and the king said to her, what is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given you, even to the half of my kingdom. And Esther said, if it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared for the king. And so after her big dramatic entrance, right, Esther knows this is not the time or the place to make her request. Okay. And so instead she requests the king and Haman's presence at this feast. Right? King, Haman, please come to this feast that I have prepared. Come tonight. Come tonight, and then I will tell you what I want, what my request is. And notice that she has such great faith that she has already prepared the feast. She has such great faith. She had already prepared the banquet. Verse 5, then the king said, bring Haman quickly, so that we may do as Esther has asked. So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. And so you have to notice the irony. Now Haman answers to Esther's will. Right? He must now do what she wants of him. Verse 6, and as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, what is your wish? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled. Then Esther answered, my wish and request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my wish and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said. Now, if you just read this, it's a little bit confusing, because it might seem like her request is that the king and Haman come to another feast. The grammar is a little bit tricky, but that's not her actual request. It's implied that she will give her request tomorrow. Okay, right. The fact that you guys come to my feast, that's not the request. The request is, I will tell you tomorrow. Okay. And so she's already kind of stormed into the throne room, and she has the king's ear, right? And now you might wonder, why didn't she just tell him, right? Why not just tell him? Or why not just tell him at the feast, at the first feast? I mean, why drag it on? Why wait till tomorrow's feast? I mean, why? Why didn't she just say it, either in the throne room or at the first feast? Why wait till the second feast? And now commentators, they're a bit divided on why she does this. Okay, some commentators think that She simply wanted to get the king alone, right, in private before she asks him. Some commentators think that she wanted to wait until the king was really drunk, really drunk, before she makes her request. Right? I don't know. I don't know. Personally, I think that Esther, she's playing the long game. She has a strategy. She's going to wait for Haman to feel comfortable, confident. She's going to wait till Haman feels like he's winning, right? And then he's going to let down his guard, right? See, I think Esther is being patient. I think Esther is setting a trap, right? And we will see that Haman, he will take the bait. Verse 9. And Haman went out that day, joyful and glad of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai at the king's gate, that he neither rose nor trembled before him, he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. And he sent and brought his friends and his wife Zeresh. And Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and the servants of the king. Okay, so here we see, Mordecai, he's completed his fast, right? The 3-day fast. And so now he's back at the palace gate, as he was before, in silent protest. Right? And this is a reminder, really, of the issue that caused this whole problem in the first place. Right? It was Haman's petty squabble with Mordecai that caused him to even want to kill the Jews, right, in the first place, because Mordecai does not honor Haman, right? And Haman, he thinks, I am second only to the king, and yet still this Jew does not honor me, right? And he's furious. It says he's filled with wrath, right? And so what does he do? And we see how a man like Haman nurses his bruised ego. Right? He calls over a bunch of his friends and his wife, and what does he do? He brags to them. And he recounted to them, right? He brags to them about his riches, and he brags to them about his 10 sons. 10 sons, in the ancient times, having a son was proof of your manliness. Well, having 10 sons was like this ultimate sign of machoism, right? Manliness. Look how manly I am. I have 10 sons. Right? And so he's bragging, and this is how he nurses his bruised ego. Then Haman said, even Queen Esther let no one but me come with the king to the feast she prepared, and tomorrow also I am invited by her together with the king. Yet all this is worth nothing to me, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. And so with all his success and his wealth and his macho-ness, he still cannot stand the fact that someone does not have as high opinion of him as he does of himself. And it fills him with wrath, and it fills him with anger, right? All this is worth nothing to me. He's so upset about this. Verse 14, then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it. Then go joyfully with the king to the feast. This idea pleased Haman, and he had the gallows made. So Haman, he's sulking. He's upset and he's angry and he's sulking. And his wife and his friends are the ones that actually goad him on. And they're the ones that say, just have Mordecai killed. Right? Don't wait for your edict. Right? The edict, that day is coming when you're going to be able to kill all the Jews. Right? And I know it's going to be a long time away. Don't wait. Right? Just do it. Right? Get rid of him. Go build a gallows. Go tell the king, you're second in command. He will surely agree with you. Just do it. Kill this man. If he's making you so upset. And Haman, of course, this sounds great to him. Right? I mean, this is stroking his ego. Yeah, I am macho. I am the second in command. I do have the king's ear. I can do what I want. And so it says that he went and he built the gallows, 50 cubits high. Okay? This would have been about 75 feet. Right? That would have made it taller than almost any other building in Susa. Most likely taller than the king's palace. And so this gallows that he builds, 75 feet high, 50 cubits high, is huge. It is high. And he intends to hang Mordecai on there to make him this public example, to make a martyr out of Mordecai. And so this is how the chapter ends. Right? Haman once again thinks that he is going to win. He thinks he has good positioning. And in this chapter, we've seen Esther. She has methodically, she has carefully executed this plan, put into place this plan to save her people, even risking her own life in the process, right? And on the other hand, we have Haman. We see Haman and the man that he is. He is impatient, he is arrogant, and he thinks he has won the game. Right? And he's going to play by his own rules, and he is so confident in the destruction of God's people. And so again, we see this great contrast, right? Not only in their character, but in their actions. I mean, Esther, she is selfless. She is sacrificial. She is patient. She is cunning. And on the other hand, we have Haman. He is egotistical. He is petty. He is hot-tempered. And Esther desires to save God's people. Haman is intent on destroying them. And so, at the end of this chapter, what can we take away from all this? What can we take away? What are some lessons we can learn? I think first we have to recognize is that God always has a plan to save his people. God always has a plan to save his people. Even though times may have been difficult or the enemies of God's people may have been many, those whom God wills, God will save. Right? And he will do it. We as readers, as believers, we are to have this faith of Mordecai. When he tells Esther, last week he told Esther, even if you do nothing, even if you and I perish, salvation will come from somewhere else. I don't know how, I don't know when, but salvation will come. We are to have this faith in our God that salvation will come. Now, isn't it incredible that the Jews, now think about this, the Jews, they are still here with us today because of God's protection and God's providence and God's salvation. The Jews are still with us here today. Now, if you really think about it, that's kind of amazing. That after thousands of years, long after Pharaoh and Xerxes have come and gone, long after Alexander the Great and the Caesars and the kings and queens of Europe, centuries of slavery and persecution and anti-Semitism and even a Holocaust, the Jews are still with us today. Now, if that is not proof of God's unending love and God's commitment and faithfulness to his children, I don't know what is. Thousands of years, and God's chosen people, the Jews, they're still here today, right? And that faithfulness that God has for his people, that extends to us as well. That extends to us. It was in God's mind, it was in God's purposes to send Jesus to the cross, right? The cross, to save us when all seemed lost. When all seemed lost, when the days were darkest, right? God was playing the long game. He was carefully, patiently arranging the pieces and waiting for the right time. God was waiting for the right time. God always has a plan to save his people. And that extends to us. And that may also extend to our unsaved neighbors, our friends, our relatives, our children. God's plan to save them extends even today. That may, if one of those people are one of God's lost sheep, who knows? God may actually be using you as part of his plan. God may be using you as part of his plan, setting up these pieces to save his lost sheep. Now, what might your part in his plan be? Maybe you are to live a life of godly witness, a godly life, making godly choices. Maybe you are to radiate the aroma of Christ. The aroma of Christ, it is that mysterious attractiveness. You can't quite put a finger on it, but there's something mysterious and attractive that Christians possess, that the world wants to know what that is. Maybe it's contentment or a sense of peace that we have because of our faith and trust in God. Or maybe God's plan is for you to prepare to share your testimony, or even to share the gospel message. You might be part of God's plan of salvation. He might be using you right now. We don't know. But we do know that God always has a plan to save his people. We don't know who all those lost sheep are. But we do know that he has a plan, and you may be part of that plan. Just as Esther had this plan, and she was part of God's plan to save God's people. Okay, secondly, here's something else we can learn from Esther's actions. We must be patient and wait on God's timing. As I said earlier, it must have been tempting for Esther to just come right out and tell the king. I mean, she had just barged into the throne room and her life had just been spared. It must have been tempting to just tell the king right then and there what she wanted. Or it must have been tempting to tell the king after that first feast, because it wasn't guaranteed that they were going to come to a second feast. Right? And this was her surefire chance to say what she wanted to say. It must have been tempting. But instead, she waited. Instead, she was patient and she waited because the timing wasn't right. Or things may not have worked out favorably if she hadn't waited. So Esther had this game plan and she was patient and she was waiting to trap her enemy. So often we rush into things just because we know what we want, right? And we think we know what God wants for us. In fact, we prayed about it and we fasted and prayed and we've talked to people and we've read the Bible and we've discerned this is what God wants me to do. Right? And at least for myself, I speak for myself, I know oftentimes I rush into it. Right? But just knowing where you want to end up, or knowing even the steps to achieve that end goal, that's not enough. The timing of things is equally, if not more, important. Just because you know where God wants you to move doesn't necessarily mean you know when God wants you to move. We must wait on Him. Brothers and sisters, our end goal, is to return to the church building for Sunday morning worship service. Okay. That has been and will still be our goal during this pandemic. Because meeting in person is important, because fellowship and interaction is important, and we need it, and we are craving it. But we need to be patient. Right? We need to wait for the right time to do things. We need to make the right moves to get there. And so even in our time, this time of social distancing, our time apart, we can exercise and we can grow in our patience. Be patient. Be patient, brothers and sisters. God has a plan. Okay. We will be together soon. We will be together soon. God bless you as we wait patiently on God's timing.